Hey everyone, it's Denise Brown from the Caregiving Years Training Academy. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to go through some exercises that help you tap into your expertise. So if you don't have paper and pen, go ahead and grab it because I'm going to give you some prompts and you're going to create some drafts to get you started. And then after, you can go back to your drafts and actually create something that you feel like, okay, this is my map. This is my path. So again, grab some paper and pen and I'll lead you through some exercises. Okay, so let's get going. So we're going to really look to the expertise that you gained through a tough time. And I know that people tell you, there's the silver lining or the blessing of the difficult times. And I actually don't believe in that because I think the tough times are tough and awful. But what I did figure out is that we do hone an expertise during the terrible times. And that expertise can turn into something we create, something we receive. I don't know why we experience terrible times. It's the question that I've been asking myself for years. And actually, when I owned a caregiving community, it was someone who cared for her husband and her mother-in-law who posed the same question, why are we suffering so much? And I thought, I don't know. However, I guess what I have figured out is that there's an expertise that comes out of our terrible time, and that expertise is worth paying attention to. And that's what we're going to do today. So just a little bit about me. So I launched an online support group for family caregivers and a website in 1996, which I sold in March of 2020. And I was helping my dad until a couple of weeks ago. My dad died July 2nd, just about 2.5 weeks ago. Okay, so I had terrible times caring for my parents, especially a time when my brother died 2 years ago. And helping my parents through their grief was just a nightmare. And as I was updating my new website recently, I thought I should figure out my timeline so anyone who's interested in taking a training program can see the evolution of my work. And honest to goodness, all I did was a very rough timetable, a timeline. And I didn't think that it was going to be a powerful exercise. I was just doing it to help individuals feel confident that they were going to be trained by someone who had an insights and knowledge and experience. And what I learned is that the timeline I created really was very helpful in terms of healing. It was fascinating to me. And then when I looked at the timeline, I could see how the expertise was developed. I could pinpoint certain times that became the developer of my expertise, or what would you say, tailored my expertise. And it was really powerful to see that. So I thought, let's do that for you too. So we're going to actually do 2 timelines. One is your terrible time timeline, and then the other one is your healing time timeline. And that's what you're going to use your paper and pen for. So as you do this today with me, I encourage you to think of it as a draft. It's a place to start. You're going to actually go back and work on it when you have time and when you want to. But I want you to get started with something. So let's start with the terrible time. So you can take a piece of paper and you can have it landscape or portrait, whatever works for you, and just start mapping out moments that stand out to you during a terrible time. You don't have to be specific about date. You can put them in a year. So if there were a couple terrible times within a year, you can actually name those terrible times. So for instance, if I were to think about the terrible time when my brother died, it would start with the day he died. So the day he died was also the the timing of notifying my parents, going to their apartment and letting them know. And then I have a sister who causes a lot of drama and chaos, and she's a nightmare. So then I would add her, her into the terrible timeline, what it was like to interact with her, what did she do? Then I had also put in the funeral, which was a terrible time. So there might be 2 weeks where I have moments that were particularly terrible during a terrible time. So for you, you might map out day of diagnosis, for instance. That could be where you think, gosh, that was a terrible time. It could be a hospitalization because of a decline or a new diagnosis. So that could be a terrible time. You could also think about, for instance, a day where you felt completely burnt out and you thought, I just can't go on. That's a terrible time. It could be when it felt like caregiving was fracturing your caregiving experience and your caregiving situation. So the fractures within a family, excuse me. So it could be that there was a time when caregiving seemed to fracture relationships. So you'd put that on your timeline as well. Kim, I'm going to mute you and I'm going to actually stop your video. Okay, so terrible times over a period of time. And again, you might just pick a month, a week, a year, but you're going to name those terrible times. And it's going to be on a timeline or whatever works for you. Doesn't have to be a timeline. I found that really helpful. It's almost like I had a horizontal line and then vertical lines that indicated what happened. It could be that you have a big circle and you're in the circle. It could be you, and then you draw out from that circle little circles of terrible times. It's just a way for you to release those terrible times. So you're thinking through what really felt like it was challenging me. And you're going to name it and put it on a timeline. Okay, so that's where you're going to start. That's the first timeline. And then the second timeline is around the healing that maybe you experienced. So you could add in healing times on that terrible timeline if you wanted, or you could start a new timeline where you measure in the thoughts, the actions, the recipients of gifts that felt like it healed you. It could even be that you say, you know what, this terrible time started in August of 2022. And by December, I felt better. I felt some peace. We oftentimes don't give value to our ability to heal. And we have that ability. Now, healing in and of itself is a timeline too. So maybe, for instance, if we go back to, so August 2022, for instance, was the terrible time. By December, you started to feel at peace. And then maybe you say in February, you were able to do something that you couldn't do before. So you want to take note of that. So something that happened to me after my brother died, and actually after my father died too, which I've always found kind of fascinating, is that I could not write good morning messages. So Monday through Friday for the past more than 10 years, I have written good morning messages on social media. So I post the messages before 9 a.m. and they're a little like, I hope today brings you, soft wind that comforts your soul, little messages of hope. So my brother died on a Monday, and it took me 6 months to be able to write good morning messages again. So the next morning after he died, I woke up and I thought, I can't write that. And I just let it go. I didn't worry about writing it. And then 6 months later, on his birthday, I was able to write good morning messages. So I would write that on my healing timeline. The same thing happened with my dad. So my dad died July 2nd. I still haven't been able to write good morning messages, and I'll pay attention to when the right time is to write those. So it could be little things that were part of a routine that got disrupted, and only you might know about the disruption. And then you'll know when you could go back and do it. That's healing. And I think it's important to map that out. And again, I think of healing as a process. So it could be that you have several healing moments. And it could be that you have several healing moments related to one terrible time. And then there are other healing moments related to another terrible time. So you might have a couple different timelines, different terrible time timelines and different healing time timelines. If you do different timelines for your terrible time and your healing time, it would be kind of interesting to match them up and see what they look like when you combine them. Again, don't overlook the little times that healed or that showed you were healing. Those are important times to recognize and to put on your timeline. Okay. So when you look at those timelines, the tough time and the healing time, I want you to now look and see what were the skills or perspectives or wisdom that helped you continue, and then add those to your timeline. It might be that the expertise only shows up in your healing timeline, and that's okay. It might show up in your tough time timeline. It might show up in both. These are yours, so you get to figure out what it looks like. But there was expertise that helped you continue. Expertise could also be lessons learned because of your age. So I think about something that I have learned over the years the hard way, and that often is silence is the best answer. So during my terrible times, I often would just be silent because I knew that I wasn't at my best. So I might not be my best in a conversation or a meeting. And rather than bring out the worst in myself during a conversation or a meeting and then have to apologize and undo the impact, I would just remain silent. So I gave myself permission to be quiet. And I found that really helpful. So that expertise is something that I am forever grateful for, because when I was having a terrible time and I wasn't at my best, I didn't show necessarily my worst to others. And then I didn't have to undo the worst impact. You could see your expertise as being able to let go what's not important and focus on what is important. That's an expertise that gets us through tough times. It could be your ability to take action. So I do notice that others, for instance, in my family, are sometimes paralyzed by stress and worry and anxiety. So while they've been paralyzed, unable to move forward, I've kept things moving forward. So that's an expertise, the ability to keep going, to take action, while others are just frozen. And I've also learned how to not be mad at them for being frozen, to just keep going because I'll know they'll catch up. And again, if I keep moving as they're frozen and they catch up to me, I can meet them with compassion. I don't have to meet them with an apology because I pushed them forward. I just gave them space to move forward. That's an expertise. It also could be that you listened really well during the terrible time. You listened to your inner wisdom. You listened to others who have had similar experiences. You listened to healthcare professionals. And that listening helped you figure out how to keep moving forward. how to face north, so to speak. Because we can get turned around so quickly during our terrible time. I think one of the hardest pieces or the hardest parts of our terrible time are continuing to face north, face forward. We can just get so turned around so quickly because it's the hurricane of life that's just unanchoring us. Your expertise could have been your ability to ask good questions. So during a terrible time in 2020, I really tapped into an expertise of asking great questions. And I now do a Sunday newsletter. I've taken a little break since my dad's death, but I'll get back to it in September. And every week I pose a question for us to ask, which becomes our intention. So the question that I asked in 2020 during this terrible time was, in what wonderful, lucrative way will this work out for me? And it was a situation where you would never think there would be a lucrative, wonderful way where it would work out for me. And lo and behold, it worked out in a wonderful, lucrative way. So posing questions became an expertise that I relied on. And then I use that now in this Sunday newsletter that I send out with a new question every week to help you set an intention. Your expertise might be your ability to get in the kitchen and whip up a great meal when you have nothing in the refrigerator and very little in the cabinet, in the cupboard. That's an expertise. I want you to pay attention to that because that's important to know that you can do that because no one else really can, but you can. Okay. So that's your expertise. And again, you're going to continue to mull this over and think through and listen to what you hear about the story you've told yourself about the terrible time that will help you tap into an expertise. So here are 3 questions for you to consider about your expertise. So how can you apply this expertise today? What could you do today in a better way because of this expertise? How could you apply this expertise in your career, for instance? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a job you work, for instance. It could be a volunteer position. It could be something that you do in the community. It could be something that you think about doing in your community, your neighborhood, that you've thought, I don't know if I can do it. You have an expertise that allows you to be able to do it. And then how can you apply this expertise in a relationship, for instance? So those are 3 questions to get you started about using that expertise to improve something in your life. These are just 3 suggestions. Today, your career, a relationship. You might have other ways you can apply the expertise. So for instance, maybe you think, you know what? This expertise that I figured out during the terrible time is great in money management. So I'm going to apply it and how I manage my money going forward. Or how you have conversations or how you use social media. There's lots of ways you can apply your expertise. And I've just given you 3 to help you feel inspired. And then it could be that your expertise creates something. So here are some suggestions for you. It could be that you write the book. And I would say, we often think that it's only worth writing a book if we know it's going to be a New York Times bestseller. It doesn't have to be a New York Times bestseller. If you feel compelled to write a book, write the book that you want to read. It could be that you decide, you know what, during this terrible time, I had really awful interactions within a certain system. So for instance, in the caregiving situation, we think of 17 different systems. So maybe you decide, you know what, I want to talk about what it's like to interact with the payer system when a family member has a diagnosis. And then you create this social media campaign to help others and to educate them about how to navigate the payer system so that they don't encounter the same challenges you did. It could be that you decide, you know what, I'm going to start a small business. And so, for instance, think back to that example I gave where you can whip up a great meal when it looks like there's nothing in the fridge and very little in the cupboards. Maybe that's a small business you start where you help people cook with what they have so that whatever's happening in the family, they can cook with what they have to feed their family. It could be that your expertise leads to a career change. You think, you know what, I didn't realize that this career that I have is kind of holding me back in my life. I think I can really flourish with a different career. A terrible time that uncovers your expertise could also help you create a better day. Maybe it's a stronger boundary within relationships or within your day. Maybe it's a healthier relationship that you can create because of your expertise, because you have insights now into what's a relationship that's worth your investment of time. These are just some ideas for you. It's not a complete list. Certainly, you can think through and be inspired to create something that works for you. It also could be that you combine some different creations. So maybe you decide, I'm going to have a career change because that's going to give me a better day. Or maybe you stay in the same career, but you think, you know what it needs? I need a stronger boundary about the work I do, or how I do work, or how I interact with my coworkers. Okay, so you might think, now what? So here's what I'm going to invite you to do. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute. If you're watching the archive, I'll post a link to a group. Actually, I'll explain it and then I'll stop sharing for just a minute. So I've created a group on our website, which is caringourway.com. And our website is a community. And if you feel like, you know what, I've got to move forward with this. I just realized what my expertise is. I don't want to lose it. I'm inspired to make a difference because of it. Then join our private group, tell us about it, and then tell us how we could support you. So it's an opportunity for you to connect with a community that's doing something similar that wants you to be successful. So we can hold you accountable if you'd like. You can post regular updates to keep us posted, and we'll celebrate the progress that you make. It's this idea that, okay, you've tapped into your expertise. Now use it and join a community that helps you and supports you and celebrates you. So if you're watching the archive, you can look at the show notes and you'll see a link to join us. And if you joined us live, I'll share the link in the chat room in just a moment. So I am a part of this community, so you can reach out to me for support. I have found it so helpful to know there's an expertise that comes out of terrible times. And I'd love to really support you in your own expertise. Okay, so join us on Caring Our Way, our community. Join us in our group and then tap into that expertise to turn it into something that really feels like, wow, this has added so much to my life. I'm grateful to have this expertise. So it worked for you, it helped you. Now you're going to put it out into the world to help others. Okay, and that's it for today. So for those of you who are joining live, just stay one more minute and I'll post the link in the chat room. For those who have joined us through the archive, who've watched the recording, thank you so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you in our group on Caring Our Way. Okay, and if you joined us live, just stay one more minute. Okay, thanks everyone.